I think, yes, we are about 6 minutes after 2, so I guess we can start. Hello, everybody. I recognize some names. Nila, very honored for your presence. You probably saw this thing already. Poonam, wonderful. I wish I could see you. And that's it. That's all the people I know, I think. Yes, so far. So, here we are in the Truth and Reconciliation big congress, as it were, that Nilima Bhatt has organized. And I'm participating in it, as is Neela Bhattacharya Saxena. And the title of my presentation is Healing the Internal and External Landscape, Upper Amazonian Shamanism. So what does it have to do with truth and reconciliation? Well, I think it has to do, or in my view, that shamanism or a shamanic ceremony brings you to an experience where you realize a truth that is not widely or mainly accepted in modernity. And by modernity, I mean Western modernity. Modernity began in Western Europe around the 16th century, more or less. Corresponds with the scientific revolution, the wars of religion, the creation of the nation state at the end of the wars of religion. So that's what I mean by modernity. I mean Western modernity that is now globalized, but very unevenly globalized. And there are many parts of the world in which it has very little penetrated. Yes, Aparna, you have a question? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. There are a couple of people waiting to be let into the meeting, ma'am. If you can please let them in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are they in now? Do you know?
Only you will be able to see that. It's just that they're sending me messages.
Usha Jagarlamudi.
Yes, I've seen several others join. I see people joining as we're coming along. So it looks like several more have popped in.
So shall I go on, or should we wait a little bit, Christina?
I think you're okay to go. They're joining as they register.
As they register.
I'm watching it.
Well, I think what I was trying to say is, how does this connect to truth and reconciliation? In the mainstream that is now globalized, and especially in the globalized knowledge system, knowledge production system, but all the institutions of modernity, there's a truth that is not accepted in the mainstream. It is marginalized, denied on the whole. There are alternative voices, but on the whole, it is marginalized. And I have spent 30 years in academia, and now that I have been out, I couldn't stand it anymore, been out and created my own nonprofit center in the upper Amazonian Amazon. I realized to what degree this mainstream view was absolutely imposed. I now feel that I was under inquisition. It was so strong, but it took me several years to realize this, but that's how I see it today, with some, you know, perspective on it. And what is the truth that is repressed, that shamanism can and often does reveal. the truth is that the world, the cosmos, the earth, what we modern call nature, is alive and sentient and has consciousness. And that kind of happens to you. That's the difference between traditions, Eastern traditions of meditation and others, where it takes long disciplined practice to get there. And I often say, half jokingly, that shamanism is meditation on jets. Oh my God, that happened. Sorry. Okay. It kind of, whether you want it or not, it just gets you there. And it's a experiential knowing. It's not a conceptual knowing, and it's very powerful and very, you can't deny it. There it is. It's not something that is argued, that is demonstrated, that is experimented. It just presents itself to you in all its reality, in all its power. So now, shamanism, what we have, the truth that needs to be revealed is that the cosmos is alive and we are part of the cosmos. The way indigenous people, especially Amazonian, but all indigenous people in general, formulate it is that we humans are kin to the non-human world. They say the spirits are your kin. They can be of an elder generation, a contemporary generation, that can vary according to place, but it expresses that we are part of it. And that is very non-modern. That is what was completely effaced by modernity, the modern revolution, the scientific revolution particularly. Then reconciliation. What is reconciliation? The reconciliation is that the modernist worldview is one that takes it for granted that we humans are to dominate nature, to control it and dominate it. So we have, and it's not just nature, it's people that are close to nature, all women. Women were excluded from the scientific revolution. They could not participate, and that lasted until the 20th century. Lasted a real long time. And also lower class people, and then with colonization, non-Western people, often well, non-white people. So the reconciliation is with the earth, with the cosmos, and with all those people that are seen as lower. And all women, because the fathers of the scientific revolution explicitly excluded women, and they excluded non-educated and poor men. You had to be wealthy to join the scientific revolution. So lower class men, all women, and when they expanded with the conquest of the Americas and the slave trade, it meant all the people they encountered were to be dominated. So I'm going to develop this in a little bit more, systematic way, and hopefully, and I think Christina will keep time for me, I want to leave a lot of time to hear your voices and your question, comments, etc. But if you want to make a comment urgently, Oh my goodness, Mary Ellen! Oh, so happy to see you.
Hi, so happy to see you.
So if it's urgent and you don't want to wait till the end, the Q&A, then unmute yourself, wave, and I'll give you the floor. Okay. Sometimes we absolutely need to intervene immediately. So let me go on and not waste time. So to give you a sense of this worldview, this Upper Amazonian indigenous worldview, I am going to quote a declaration of a Quechua people of the Upper Ecuadorian Amazon. They are the same people with the same name as the Upper Peruvian Amazon where my center is located, and they are connected ancestrally. So it's the same people. And this group, the Sarayaku people, suffered for close to 70 years with oil extraction, which totally destroyed their environment and their place. And they brought a suit on the International Court of the Americas, and they eventually won. And with the settlement, the money settlement that they got, they were able to become independent and recreate and reorganize their communities along traditional lines. And in 2018, they widely distributed a pamphlet, which I translated in English, and I will just extract the core of it. For the peoples and nations that inhabit the Amazon basin, the forest is alive. It is Kausak Sacha, living forest in Quechua, that is their language. It is inhabited by protector beings that carefully secure the equilibrium in the fragile ecosystem and in their relationship with human beings. The waterfalls, the lakes, the rivers, the swamps, the salt sources, the great trees and mountains have their own protector beings. They are Runayuk. Those places are inhabited by beings who have a life like our own. From the continuous relationship with those protector beings depend the perpetuity of Kausak Sacha, the living forest, and thus the maintenance of the diversity of life. This, in its turn, permits a natural equilibrium and the vital harmony among beings, as well as our own continuity as people. The living forest is where the life of the original inhabitants begins and takes place. Kausak Sacha is itself a being with whom the Yachak Kuna, the shamans, communicate to receive and share their knowledge with the people, with the support of other wise men and women. All this learning guides and orients the Amazonian people toward the Sumak Kausai, the right, good, just living. Kausak Sacha, the living forest, is the primordial source of Sumak Kausai. Very interesting. And as such, offers a living space for its diverse beings and people and revitalizes their emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual aspects. Okay, so there's a lot packed into this quote. What I want to say is that in Sarayaku, the Yachak Kuna, the shamans or curanderos in Spanish, offer and take themselves an entheogen. An entheogen can also be called a psychotropic or psychedelic, mind-expanding brew of two plants of the Amazon under very strict ritual conditions. You have to prepare yourself for this ceremony. You just don't do it like that. And it is the shamans who mediate between the non-human world and the human world, who communicate or translate, if you will, not only the the shamans, but the people who participate, because they can experience it. And I have to say that I have been going to this place for almost 24 years, and I have been doing ayahuasca ceremonies since then, several times a year, as well as at least a half dozen retreats in the forest that are extended ceremonies. So that is the testimony of the Sarayaku people, the Quichua Sarayaku people in Ecuador. And now, having said that, even though they are the same ethnic group as the Quichua La Mista, where my center is, the penetration of modernity, where my center is located, is fearsome. So a lot of the young Quichuas don't want to do anything traditional, are ashamed. There's huge amount of racism towards indigenous people in Peru, very strong. It totally took me by surprise when I first went there. It's very, very strong. So, you know, it's never taught in the schools. They are made to feel inferior in schools and so forth and so on. All the things that happen with racism, which is very sad to see. But there are islands of hope, just such as the Sarayaku people and many others. Another voice that I would like to bring to you is of a shaman from also the Upper Amazon, but in Brazil, but the same ecological region. That is the eastern foothills of the Andes, which is the Upper Amazon. And he comes from an ethnic group called the Yanomami in Brazil. And his autobiography was written down by a French anthropologist who had worked with him for decades and spoke fluent Yanomami. So I am going to now quote two passages by Davi Kopenawa, who, by the way, has become quite famous through this book and travels widely to defend the forest, because in his region that is quite remote, what he calls the whites arrived in his lifetime. And their arrival spelled disaster for the life of the people who began dying and the forest. So he became a voice for the protection of the forest and of his people. And since the publication of the book, The Falling Sky, he's become very, very well known. And here I'm quoting him. Since the beginning of time, Omama, the creator's spirit, has been the center of what the white people call ecology. For the shamans, these have always been words that come from the spirits to defend the forest. In the forest, we human beings are the ecology, but it is equally the shapiri, the spirits, the game, the trees, the rivers, the fish, the sky, the rain, the wind, and the sun. It is everything that isn't surrounded by fences yet. If the forest were dead, we would be as dead as it is, but it is truly alive. The white people may not hear it complain, yet it feels pain just like we humans do. And then another quote of his. White people are surprised to look at us become spirits with the Yakoana. The Yakoana is their entheogen for psychedelic. It also has DMT, like dimethyltryptamine, like ayahuasca, like we have in the pineal gland in our brain. So it's a natural thing that we have in our brain. And it is their sacred psychotropic plant made from the bark of a particular tree. They think that we are losing our minds. Yet, if they understood our language and cared enough to ask, they might understand the words that the shapiri, the spirits, bring us from the edges of the earth, the sky's back, and the underworld they can come from. But white people prefer to remain deaf because they find themselves too clever with their paper skins, their machines, and their merchandise. So That's quite an indictment. And so one of the very strong point I want to bring out from David Kopenawa's quotation is that there's what contrasts so much with Western modernity is the absence of a nature-culture antinomy, opposition, where, you know, excluded middle between nature and culture. You are either nature or culture, you can't be both. That doesn't exist. And the whites consider taking entheogens, or psychedelic, as losing one's mind. And they deride it, and they don't take it seriously. Now, I know that many of you have heard of ayahuasca, particularly. It's become very famous, and one could say even chic in certain circles. And people go to the Amazon looking for it. And they also bring shamans to the US and other northern countries to do ayahuasca. Now that, of course, because of the tremendous demand from people of the North and the fact that people of the North have more purchasing power than usually people in Peru or Ecuador, that has given rise to charlatan shamans who are either very lightly trained or not trained at all. And so many people have complained loudly against ayahuasca and shamanism. But, you know, this is, in a market economy, this is inevitable to happen. And the safeguard is that you need to know people who know the local situation and through them access contact with real shamans. That's one issue, but it's not something that indicts shamanism per se. Yes, you will have charlatans when lots of money want it and tourists come and they pay you, and so that will happen. That doesn't mean that shamanism doesn't work or is to be thrown out or not to engage in it. The other issue, of course, is that shamanism everywhere, I think, although my knowledge is much deeper with Upper Amazonian shamanism, being a shaman gives you a power through the plant and through the training that you go through, which can be very, very severe. But this power can be used for good or bad ends. And that in Western modernity is looked as a terrible defect. And I will go into why it's seen that way and what is our inheritance. Yes, Barna, you want to ask something? No. I thought you were raising your hand. So the issue is that just as among indigenous people, there is no antinomy between nature and culture, there's similarly no excluded middle between good and bad. As my dear friend and colleague Neela, who honors me by being here, who probably heard all that before, says it, the two, you know, polarities exist throughout the world, the cosmos, day and night, hot and cold, masculine, feminine, etc., etc., up and down. And the issue is, how are they related? And I love the way Neela puts it. They can be dueling, battling, or they can be dancing. And this is a fundamental, she does it very poetically, but it's a fundamental conceptual and otherwise real difference. And you have to dance with that polarity between good and bad. And that was unacceptable in Western Europe. Now, why did it become unacceptable, even though it had been around for centuries? That's another story that I hope to be able to get to. So what happened in Western Europe? Western Europe had so-called witches who were shamanesses. And they were men shaman and women shaman. And they were healers, just like in Peru. And different types of healers, but they had several entheogenic plants, psychedelic plants, such as belladonna, certain type of mushroom, Amanita muscaria in particular, ergot, cannabis, and others. They were shamanesses, and I'm basing that on very serious historical research on witches done by very serious historians. So this is not, lightly said or shared. And they had been around because a lot of what they were doing were pre-Christian. And of course, just like in the upper Amazon of Peru or Ecuador, where Catholicism has been imposed for 500 years, and at the beginning very harshly, you have a blending of Catholicism and pre-Christian, what the Christians call paganism, which is a rather derogatory term in the Christian vocabulary. But it's only in 1484, that is at the end of the 15th century, that the Pope declared witches to be heretics and that they could be burned alive, which they were. So why all of a sudden these women became, and men, some of them were men, became heretic that could be killed? I think that history is very complex and we can't go into it, but a lot has to do with the enclosure of the commons and making the earth private property, and the beginning of what eventually became capitalism. But that's a complex story and we can't go there. In any case, this happened at the end of the 15th century. Then the next thing that happened, which really marked the attitude of modernity towards shamanism, is the Reformation, the birth of another Christian stream, Protestantism. That happened finally in 1521. And almost immediately, it created havoc. In France, which I know better than the situation in other places, in France, in the 16th century, the 1500s, saw 8 civil wars. And I tell you, when I read the history of these civil wars, I could hardly read it. It was so brutal that I thought, what they showed from the extremist Muslims has nothing on us as Europeans. We were absolutely savages. It was horrible. And this eventually grew because all the political entities lined with either Protestantism or Catholicism, and it grew at the beginning of the 17th century, at the beginning of the 1600s, into an international war known as the 30 Years' War, because it lasted 30 years, in which 35% of the European population died. So this is the context, the social political context of the scientific revolution. So what happens just at the end of the 30 Years' War with the Treaty of Westphalia that creates the nation state? Before you had kingdom and duchies and etc., but you didn't have the nation state. Begins an alternative knowledge system formalized. The beginnings go, usually they are placed to the 15th century, to the 16th century, mid-16th century, Copernicus. But the immediate context was mayhem, murder, brutal murder. And the knowledge institutions were the monopoly of the Catholic Church. And what the general opinion, widespread opinion of the time was that it was mayhem, people were killing each other, and we need to reestablish law and order. Sounds familiar? In America, it sounds familiar. That's what Trump is saying. Okay, we need to replace law and order. But law and order could not be re-established along in the old ways, because the old ways, you had the Protestants saying, we have the one truth, and the Catholics saying, we have the one truth. Result, bang. These two sworn enemies agreed on one thing only. And that one thing was to eradicate the worldview of the so-called witches and their literate counterpart, the occult philosophers. The witches and warlocks, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, okay. You want to speak, Christina?
Just letting you know, we're about almost 40 minutes in.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you. These people, the so-called witches and warlocks, belong to the oral peasantry, the European oral peasantry. And being in the Upper Amazon, it's like being back in the 15th, 16th century in Europe, because you have all kinds of healers, men and women, herbalists, and all kinds of different healers. And then you had their literate counterpart who could write, who are called the occult philosophers, who were in contact with them and sometimes learned from them. This is all, shown historically. And their worldview was called anima mundi, the soul of the world. And anima is a Latin word meaning soul, but it's feminine. And the soul of the world is feminine. The soul is feminine, and the soul of the world is feminine. And just to give you a whiff of that worldview, I'll quote one occult philosopher, Pico della Mirandola. He says, all this great body of the world is a soul, full of the intellect of God, who fills it within and without and vivifies the all. The world is alive, all matter is full of life, matter and bodies or substances are energies of God. And there were several. So it is a very integrated worldview where you don't have an inside and an outside. It's very similar to the indigenous worldview that I quoted you about. And it was, point is, it was successfully assassinated. That's the word I like to, or murdered, the word I like to use. Eradicated, but very successfully. By the end of the 17th century, nobody could claim to be an occult philosopher, let alone a witch. They had been mostly burned alive. So it just completely lost any credibility. And on the contrary, it was considered to be backwards, superstitious, and profoundly wrong and dangerous and satanic, right? The church people called it satanic. The fathers of the scientific revolution called it superstitious and wrong, false, right? The point is that when the conquistadores came to Latin America, this was going on in Spain. And when they arrived in Peru in 1531, they quickly enacted the laws of extirpation of idolatry. extirpación de idolatría in Spanish, which they eradicated the shamanesses and the shamans, and the priestesses and the priest. And they went at it with a vengeance. The difference between what happened in Latin America and what happened in Europe is very strange. In Latin America, they did not succeed in eradicating it. In Europe, they did succeed. They absolutely eradicated it. I mean, the Wiccan movement now it's a marginalized movement, and it has no rights of citizenship in academia whatsoever, I know personally. Now I think I will end with two quotes, one by the great philosopher of modernity, René Descartes, the French philosopher from the early 17th century. And he will speak for himself. It's very direct. And he says, all this great body of the world, no, that's Pico de la Medalla. There exist no occult forces in stones or plants. There are no amazing and marvelous sympathies and antipathees. In fact, there exists nothing in the whole of nature which cannot be explained in terms of purely corporeal causes, totally devoid of mind and thought. 1641, René Descartes. So it's very clear in these words that he's arguing against anima mundi and against the occult philosophers and their oral peasant allies, or teachers rather. And then another great father of the scientific revolution, Robert Boyle, of the mid-17th century, who invented the experimental scientific method with his apparatus called the air pump. Nowadays it seems very simple, but at the time it was the equivalent of the cyclotron, huge thing. And this is what Boyle says: the veneration wherewith men are imbued for what they call nature has been a discouraging impediment to the empire of man over the inferior creatures of God. The inferior creatures of God. So again, the wording clearly refers to anima mundi and that worldview. And that worldview is an impediment to the empire, which is the domination of man, and he means man, not men and women, over the inferior creatures of God. And who are those inferior creatures of God? Nature, animals, plants, everything in nature, women, all women, lower class European men, that the oral peasantry, and the darker people that they encountered when they conquered and colonized. So this has everything to do with a colonizing gaze. And what happened is, because of the mayhem that was going on in Western Europe due to the wars of religion, there was a hue and cry, we need to restore certainty. Certainty had been broken asunder with Protestantism and Catholicism, both claiming the one truth. And the way this desire to restore certainty was executed was, was by creating a new cosmology, which we have inherited, and it is taught from K through PhD. And you really internalize it. What is this thing that is being taught? What was invented? A dead, insentient cosmos. that was to be a neutral domain. It needed to be outside of anything remotely religious or even metaphysical. And that was to be the basis upon which a new knowledge was going to be built, safely protected outside of the issues that made people kill each other. So this view of the cosmos, the earth, nature as a dead, mechanical, insentient object was invented for political and cultural purposes, specific to Western Europe of that time. It has been falsely presented, taught as a universal truth. I'm not saying that the science built upon that foundation is not true, but I use truth with a non-capitalized T. There are many truths built on different foundations. The problem, in my view, is that the truth of classical science, because science has moved, even though it has moved to places that aren't fully acceptable in mainstream academia yet, hopefully they will be, that where I am in my thought, I have lost my thought.
Frédérique, Elsie had a question. Perhaps
yes,
you can
sure.
answer that because we'll run out of time then.
Okay, okay, where's Elsie?
Here I am, Frédérique. So, hi. You said that you didn't have time to answer this question. I'm going to ask you if you could answer it in one sentence, nonetheless. You know that I am very interested in the linkages between our economic gaze, how we see the world and operate economically and have been, and the linkages with what you're talking about, which is the spirit of life as a web of life, right? What is it about the seizure of the commons that was logically linked to the extermination of the shamans and the witches and the anima mundi? What was the
Fantastic.
economics of it? What was the economics of it? Because we are now facing the we need to unwind that. So I really would like to know if you could pinpoint what was the logical connection.
Okay. So this is something that I have thought a great deal about and written about also. What is the enclosure of the commons? The commons was the place where healers, herbalists and other types of healers lived and gathered their plants and carried out their rituals. It was considered alive, numinous, that is sacred, and by enclosing it, the powerful people, it was totally against practice and the current laws, but because of their power, they were merchants or aristocrats, they imposed, they fenced it, and they transformed the land into a private investment for profit. At the beginning, it was to graze sheep to make wool cloth, because that had a world market already, so to make more money, okay? That is crucial, because you transform something that was lived in and apprehended in a sacred, numinous, anima mundi way to something, an investment by an individual male. They were all men, okay? That is the basis. And from this is land as capital. Then labor became capital, became also a commodity. Land as a commodity, you could sell it, buy it or sell it. Then labor became a commodity, which did not exist and does not exist in indigenous communities. It's a very weird idea. You have to own your body and sell the body labor force. In the commons or in indigenous, your body is not a private property of you. You owe it to the community, your non-human kins, the cosmos. And you have to do all kinds of things for them. It's not your private property. And then money eventually also became a commodity. So these three transformations, land as a commodity, labor as a commodity, and money as a commodity, together, and they happen slowly, but they all happen in time, created capitalism. And the attitude towards land and nature, as well as people's bodies, as something not sacred, not numinous, something to create more wealth, to accumulate. And when it is land, it is, you are extracting from it whatever it can give you to make a profit. So the extractivism is at the heart of this worldview and at the heart of capitalism. And it's destroying the earth, it's destroying us. Does that answer?
Can I ask a follow-up? So given where we are today, where there's an increasing resistance to this, the commons, common good, the well-being is not shared adequately. There's a revolution going on in many ways. What do you see as the path to a solution?
I don't think we can, I used to think, you know, in revolutionary terms when I was young. I've given that up. We've seen what that has created. It's created disasters, millions of people dead. So I have left that, you know, grand scheme of things. So we have to do grassroots. And one of the things that I am focusing on, just because I happen to, this is my experience, is what I've learned, not because it's the best or the way to address our issues, but we are finding ourselves not only in an incredibly unjust world, filled with racism, which, you know, I've talked about, but also this world, even the people who are well off, end up with mental illness, severe mental illness, addiction. This cross-cut classes, addiction, suicide cross-cuts classes. So the system is destroying us. The people is destroying the earth, that we all know. So one way for me is, and it's not the only way by far, and you will hear from Neela and many others, I'm sure, but it's the way that lately I have come to know intimately and value very much, is to, by the way, the only thing that can treat effectively addiction is psychedelic, done the right way, which is in a sacred ritual context. That because the current treatments don't work, methadone doesn't work. And the same for mental illness. And this is quoted by Michael Pollan in his latest book on psychedelics, How to Change Your Mind. He quotes Tom Insel, who was the director of NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health in the US until 2015. He said to him, to Pollan, our mental health system is broken. The epidemic is, like COVID, is on the rise in the US and in the European Union and in most developed, so-called developed countries, and usually modern places. We are in the situation where these substances are illegal. The sacred plants that are non-addictive are illegal. It just tells you everything about this civilization, how wrong-headed it is. And all the big series of Prozac and Ritalin and blah, 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 turns out they are addictive. And some of them, like OxyContin, can kill you. So, you know, Big Pharma is not doing very well. And the plants that can help us are illegal. So you run a tremendous risk of doing it here. It's under the radar all over the US and places like the US. Poland documents that. I have never done it this way because knowing how you must prepare ayahuasca, how you must gather it, I mean, it's such a lengthy and careful and ritualized process that I don't trust doing it with here. Maybe I'm too much of a purist, but fortunately it is legal in Peru. Unfortunately, it is illegal in many places, even in the global south, you know, who just follow the lead of places like the EU and the US. But in Peru, thank God, it's legal, so you can do it legally. And if you're an American citizen, it's legal for you to because you follow the local laws when you are in that place.
Frédérique, it looks like we have another question from Mary Helen.
Yeah.
Helen.
Hi, Frédérique.
Hi,
It's
good to see you.
good to see you. We have so much catching up to do, but I just wanted to ask a question that's been on my mind. I am training to be a marriage and family therapist. I'm halfway through, so I'm starting practicum. And of course, I don't know if you know it, MFT is all based in cybernetics and Gregory Bateson. And so, I mean, your classes changed my intellectual life entirely, and have never left my mind as I've gone through the continued applications, have dogged me in the best way. But so Gregory Bateson's whole notion of the family system and even the system of a single person and then the human ecology was actually, I'm worried was kind of the reverse of what we're. Hi.
The cute baby.
Get out of here. So it seems like Bateson's. Hey, can you let Mama finish talking? I'm going to make your lunch. It seems like Bateson's cybernetics was almost to try to apply some of the rigor of science to social sciences. And I think it's not, like, I would object to that strongly, of course. But his vision was of cybernetics was so complex that he wanted to, it's like string theory for psychology or for human sciences. He wanted to add so much complexity to the way we see ourselves in systems with one another and with the world and in ourselves, that we could understand how to, you know, manipulate those patterns in ways that were a little more standardized. And so I wonder if you know anything about that work. He was with Margaret Mead. They had a relationship. I wonder if there are any intersections to anthropology that I'm not aware of that would respond to some of my hesitation to that endeavor of Bateson's, or reassure me.
No, I love Bateson. Bateson is amazing. You can't go wrong with Bateson. Go ahead. Go ahead. And by the way, I don't want to leave the impression that I'm anti-science. I'm anti-classical science, right? Classical
Anti-scientism.
science ended really. Usually, it's dated by specialists with Newton's Principia Mathematica at the end of the 17th century. But at the beginning of the 20th century, the quantum revolution and more things since, things have changed profoundly, profoundly. Unfortunately, the vistas open, those scientists that are willing to see the metaphysical and philosophical implication of their work, they're very few, and they're very few for very concrete reasons. One of my close friends is a quantum physicist, a woman, and she wanted to go there in graduate school, and they said, no, you'll never get a job, and you can't go there. Anyway, you're a woman, so you can't go there. So anyway, she got her PhD in theoretical quantum physics, and then eventually went on to do what she wanted, but it was really uphill. And where she is now, I mean, she used to be at Mount Holyoke, that's how we became friends. And I learned a huge amount from her. But where she's now, which is UC Santa Cruz, they won't take her in the physics department. She's in women's studies department. That tells you everything about the status of those scientists who are willing and eager, in fact, to go and go deep in the metaphysical, moral, even spiritual implication of their work. If you're young and you're in graduate school, they completely discourage you. And, you know, I felt this even in anthropology so strong at Smith. It was so strong that I needed to get out. You know, when my youngest child graduated from college, I said, okay, I'm out, because it's so strong. And the more distance I have from that time, the more I realize how strong the constraint. It's not a constraint. I call it an inquisition, but it's completely tacit. Yes?
Frédérique, why don't you tell people about your experiments with the Black Earth thing at your center? A lot of people here probably do not know what you have been doing there.
Yes, yes. So what I'm doing there is, I was asked by the leader, indigenous leader, local indigenous leader, who I brought students, because I did study abroad courses there, to his place, and he explained to all of us that the forest is getting further and further away. They have a limited territory, and there's more and more deforestation. The deforestation is mostly due, first of all, the indigenous people have been pushed to the worst places, you know, lands on very difficult mountainous terrain. And even there, they have to delimit, they've lost the common land, right? So it's not enough territory to make slash and burn, which is their way of growing food, sustainable. Experts say for making slash and burn, which is making a clearing in the forest, cutting the trees at waist high, burning the branches, which gives some nutrient to very poor Amazonian soil, which is known to be very poor. And then you can grow crops for a few years, and then you let the trees regrow. That's sustainable if a family has 50 hectares, over 100 acres. Now they have between 3 and 10 hectares, sorry, between 6 and 20 acres. And the result, if you do over many, many, many years, eventually the forest no longer regenerates and the soil is dead. So this is happening more and more and more. And he was explaining that to us, and he said, please help us. I've heard that you're interested in sustainability, help us. So through readings and the courses that I was doing, I had learned about a pre-Columbian anthropogenic soil that is called, I mean, the term anthropogenic means made by humans. It's a misleading term, but it's the term. There's no other term, because we can't speak in any other way in our language. By pre-Columbian people, and it's been discovered by archaeologists. starting in the late 19th century, but really took off in the 20th century. And it's been well documented. And they have discovered that this soil is so fertile that it hasn't been touched for 500 years since everybody died, just about. Between 96 and 99% of the indigenous people died when the Europeans came. And so that soil has not been touched. They forgot how to make it, but they've discovered that it created great civilizations, large cities, ceremonial centers, the first ceramics in all of the Americas. Tremendous achievements, tremendous achievements. And soil scientists have studied this soil very, very carefully, and it's been a lot published. So on the basis of that, those publications and talking to my collaborators at my center, we set about to recreate this soil. And I knew that if it was going to work, it had to be free. So the ingredients had to be free. So we use locally available ingredients that are discarded, like crushed sugarcane, like coconut shells, like cow manure. And coming from India, you know, where I did my early work, I thought, cow manure is left on the floor, nobody's picking it up. Nobody's picking it up. Thank God we pick it up. As you know, in South Asia, you don't waste cow manure. It's an amazing substance. And so forth and so on. And so I've been able to regenerate this. I say regenerate because you can't recreate it the way they did it, because you don't have enough information how they did it. But my contribution is, first of all, that I've tried to do it. We've tried to do it at my center, and we've succeeded. And we have transformed brick-like soil by putting this soil on top of it into getting incredibly profuse crops. So it works. The problem is that it's difficult. It needs a key ingredient that is called biochar, which is a type of charcoal produced under high temperature with very little oxygen. So we created a backyard biochar oven, and we create this this biochar. But that's not something that is feasible for families, small farming families. You know, and to do it in the settlement and have the community agree to do it and pitch in to do it. We built four biochar ovens in 4 communities we worked with, but they never used it. So that's a complex story. But we now have shifted to a much simpler method, which is called regenerative agriculture, 4 per 1,000 regenerative agriculture. Basically, you use compost and you need to do terracing, some form of terracing, because the lands are like that, and the rains are torrential, and whatever you put on the soil, if you don't make a terrace, will be carried away. So we do both methods. We teach it through the provincial school board in various schools at different levels. And so that's the kind of day-to-day work that we do besides shamanic work. Yeah.
Thank you. Does
Frédérique,
anyone else have questions?
Not a question, but just a thought. Can you guys? Hi, can you guys hear me? I'm Betty.
Yes, can you show yourself?
It's almost past midnight and my 3-year-old is sleeping beside me. So unless you are not scared seeing my, all right, wait a minute. I'll try to switch on the lights, but.
Oh, no, you will wake the baby up. Don't do that, don't do that.
Is next to me, and yes, I
You
think
are from Orissa. You're Patnaik from Orissa?
That's
That's
right.
why.
And Patnaik.
That's why I did my early work in Puri Jagannath.
Oh, it's great timing. Puri Jagannath is, yeah, the Rath Yatra in Puri Jagannath just got over, and the Lord has come back to, you know, its their original place. So
Right.
just give me 1 minute.
Wonderful.
Struggling with the lights. Frédérique, I'm just.
Don't wake up your baby. Don't wake up. Don't turn on the light. Don't turn on the light. Your voice is enough.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I think I have two very strong thoughts that that came into my mind as I was listening to you. A, your immense work with what you have done. So thank you so much through this journey and telling me so many different things that I was not aware of. So thank you so much. It's a very important day for us in India because tomorrow happens to be the Guru Bell, which is considered to be a very important day for the teacher. And I have found a new teacher in you, Frédérique. So follow you and your work. Guru Purnima. That's. Again, just 3 words, and I'm going to, use those 3 words to articulate what I really want to say. One is, I think, to do with the logic. I think in different phases of what you actually narrated, right from the invaders who came and destroyed certain civilizations and certain rituals, I think they used a lot of logic in the, I think in the disguise of scientific research, right? So their logic was perhaps, and whatever it was, it actually helped that time, right? So the intention of those invaders or of those people actually solved or met that purpose during that time. Would you agree with me on that?
You see, in 1531, when the Spanish entered what is now known as Peru and colonized it, took it over, the new knowledge was not yet established. It took another century.
Yeah.
Okay. So later, of course, through the Spaniard, they brought in that science, that modern knowledge, and now it dominates. It absolutely dominates in the, this is the work that I try to be engaged in. The young indigenous people who go through schools and are in high school, first of all, they're discriminated against, number one, but there's nothing to help them marry or hold together these two, or, they come out of it with such disdain for their ancestral worldview and practices that are considered superstitious. Leave it behind. This is, it's worth nothing. Your language. They don't want to speak Quechua. I've been to school where we teach this method, and they all, I know from their names, they look the same as mestizo people, but the minute you know their name, you know they're indigenous people, and you ask them, do you know, will you say a few words in Quechua? They're all ashamed, and they don't. It's very sad. Okay, it's very, very sad, because the dominant ethos in Peru, as in so much of the global South, is the modern West and its knowledge system, but in the mainstream, right? The dominant part of it, not what is emerging and alternatives. So that's very sad to see, and it hurts to see it. And as far as my team, technical team that teaches doing this Black Earth in these 2 methods, they are Quechua, they are indigenous people. And we have tried to bring in offerings, because one of my contribution in all this literature, vast literature on Black Earth, not a word on the worldview or the culture of the indigenous people who created, co-created, I say co-created with the non-human spirits.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So anthropogenic is not a good term, not a word, but I learned from my collaborators that still today, certain elder people are offering ceramics, broken ceramics. There's broken ceramics in all this earth found by archaeologists. Nobody is saying where it comes from. It comes from offering to the spirits of the earth, the water, the earth, the soil, the sun, the moon, the forest, etc., etc. And I have wanted so badly, especially in the communities school, indigenous community school, to introduce this. No way, it's public school, you can't do that. You can crush yourself, you can do Catholic stuff, but to do that is absolutely forbidden. It hurts. There's nothing, you just do what you can. It's very slow. Try to...
Sorry, this is just winded one, Frédérique. So the second word was intention, right? So I think we went wrong with the intention, the modernity somewhere, like psychedelic, acceptance of psychedelic was set intention, but we went haywire. We could not control it. We did not do it in a controlled way. So I think the intentions of a few led to this vicious circle. I also believe, and the final word is circle, Frédérique, when I was thinking about your narration, is that I think we were on a high and we went on to the low. And I think we are going to go high again with maybe more collectives, more awareness with the kind of work that you're doing, Frédérique, from, I do not know, maybe you're at so many miles away from me at a different place, but I see that the circle arc is now going up. We have done as much damage. We have quite literally hit the rock bottom. It started off with logic. Intention was lost. We did something really wrong. We really have to do right. It means, it could mean saving the original seeds for the future. Traditions, I don't know, literature, words, language. There's so many things that we have lost. So many things that we have lost, Frédérique.
So true. So true. Thank you. Thank you, Betty.
This is Lord Jagannath. I don't know if you can see. Could you see that?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Frédérique. Thank you so much. This was very insightful.
We have about 10 minutes left in our time slot. If there's any further questions, comments?
Can I just interject just to something? See, there is a difference between actual reason in Western modernity that Frédérique so beautifully articulated. Max Weber uses the word instrumental rationality, I think, which is a very useful word, which is applied to justify slavery because everything became nothing but economic and this, reductive materialism. So we actually have to find our reason. Freud was great. He dismantled the delusion of the Enlightenment. So that a lot of work has been done in the Western world itself because they could see that we are actually not really rational. So much of our actions come from, somewhere else. I mean, Freud was right about a lot of things. He made mistakes. He definitely didn't understand a lot of stuff that women scholars have pointed out. But we need to make a distinction between real reason and this reductive rationalism. So we need to find that balance. Otherwise, we don't want to have some sort of blind faith or, irrational emotionalism either. But that is a lot of work. And people go by, you know, this lowest common denominator. So so we need to have that understanding so that we do not just go from one end to the other. So finding, that's why this Frédérique was so kind. I talk about this dancing duality, that we need to be able to balance that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, in a sense, I mean, I want to say immediately, I agree with what you're saying. So it is, you know, like Ian McGilchrist in his book that you made me read. It's such a fantastic book about the divided brain. We Western modernity has a tremendously huge left brain and an atrophied right brain. And what we need to do is to bring them in balance and in communication. And so it doesn't say that you turn your back on your left brain, right, which is rationality and so forth, but that you do not consider the right brain intuition, integral understanding, as inferior or as totally separate. I mean, the way the academia is organized was, you know, you have social science modeled on the natural sciences, humanities, arts, and then performing arts, right? And they're silos. It's silo way of, you know, you have very little intercommunication between them. And especially if you're in the performing arts, like I started as a dancer of Indian classical dance, the common perception of of me in graduate school was that I had to keep quiet that I was a dancer on two counts.
Well said. Yeah.
One is that if you're a dancer, you're stupid. And two, if you are a dancer of Indian classical dance, which they call ethno dance, everything that's not Western is ethno something, that's a no-no, because that's going native, and that's an absolute taboo in anthropology. So, which is unbelievable, because I have learned so much from Orissa. I was totally transformed, deep, deep things. And I'm learning so much from Amazon, the Upper Amazon, and my indigenous collaborators. But you have this myth, at least in anthropology, that you have to speak, right? Your voice is from this non-local place, which is a universal place. And this is why I insist on the creation of this modern cosmology, because we act in academia, in generally, mostly, certainly in anthropology, but many other disciplines, as if where you are speaking from and observing from is non-localized. It's a universal place, you know. It believes in this separation between the observer and the observed. That's been shown in quantum physics to be impossible, to never happen. And morally, it is extremely problematic, because you engage with people, and to prevent yourself from being what Panikkar used to call fecundated by the other, what an impoverishment, what, and it, you know, whether you, it's total illusion that you are standing in this non-local universal place. It's an illusion, which in fact translates into a privileged place of a Western colonial gaze. It's a very radical thing to say, but I have become even more convinced now than I was when I was teaching Mary Helen at Smith of that statement. This so-called universal non-local gaze is a colonial gaze, and people need to become aware.
Absolutely.
We need to make work on ourselves deeply.
Absolutely, Frédérique, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But that is connected with that religious worldview too, right? The transcendental God somewhere out there, which only the white man had privileged access to, you know, through the thinking capacities. So your earlier thing about, you know, losing the mind. After all, Zen is about no mind, right? And unless you experience it, it's some mumbo jumbo or some, you know, whatever stuff. So absolutely, this is just quite fantastic. So thank you for elaborating. I know your work, but every time I hear you clarify another aspect of your work. So I appreciate that very much.
I learn something whenever I listen to you. You've taught me so much.
May I suggest that we are in that moment now. There is an opening, you know, here in this, it's Elsie speaking. I know, Frédérique, you're looking, who's talking? It's Elsie. Here in the States, notice the iconography is being ripped down. That colonial lens of, for example, the Confederacy, the Confederate flag is being retired. Teddy Roosevelt, the ultimate colonialist and conqueror of nature, his statue's coming down from in front of the Museum of Natural History. This is the moment, Frédérique. This is the moment.
Yes, it's happening. It gives me a lot
Let's get the word out there.
Gives me a lot of hope. I mean, these protests have given me so much hope. I mean, you really feel, I'm of a generation that I was part of the late 60s protest. The difference, I think, because I've thought a lot about the difference when I was young and protesting and what is happening now. The difference is that a lot of the energy behind the 60s, at least late 60s protest, was the Vietnam War. And that was, you see, there was a draft then. So a lot had to do with, of course, I'm not saying that it was all self-centered and they didn't want to go to war. No, it's much more complex than that. They were against the war. But nevertheless, there was that impetus of resisting being drafted. And now what you have is, you don't have any particular impetus that self-promoting or self-protecting impetus on the part of young men or young women to push them to protest. It's really the cry of the heart when you see and you witness through the videos what is going on. And they say, no, we can't condone this. We've got to react. So this is, and there are many more in the civil rights movement of the 60s. Now there are many more whites in these protests than there were in the 60s. They were whites, but not in the same number. So I think the moment is, and then we're building on the civil rights, we're building on the anti-war, on the women's movement, on the LGBTQ movement. So we're building on all kinds of things, and it's kind of emerging as a powerful wave. And it's wonderful to see. It's wonderful to see.
Frédérique, I think we are at our time. I saw there was a comment. I don't know if we want to end on our time, or I think there was one comment in the chat.
If nobody has any hurry, this is an important question from Asim Siddiqui, Frédérique. So if you are not in a hurry, we could.
No, I'm not in a hurry. I'm not in a hurry. What is the question?
Can you see the chat? Or Asim, can you speak? It's a very important question because especially, non-duality based.
Asim Siddiqui.
Yes. Asim, go ahead.
Hi, I'm in Bangalore. I also actually am in academia. I teach philosophy. I'm also quite aware of the problems that you have raised, Frédérique. I have been engaged with meditative practices, which comes from Buddhism, Sufism, and Tantric meditative practices. And in meditation, generally, there is a certain kind of focus on focusing on your breath and sensations, and there is a certain kind of approach towards uniting with the divine. So it presents a very single dimension picture of spirituality, whereas in my understanding of shamanic practices, it's much more, it engages with all kinds of aspects of spirituality, which includes the darker aspects as well, the darker spirits, and there are many kinds of spirits which are not perceptible to us usually. So I wanted to know if you can say a bit more on how shamanic practices kind of open or refines our senses to perceive these spirits, and how to engage with and understand spirituality in a more complex.
I missed the last words. Oops, it's gone. What did he say at the end?
Well, I think he's kind of right. When you have this whitewashed, what I am reading, kind of non-duality, abstract meditation kind of stuff, which denies, which actually there is a term for it, which is called, it's kind of bypassing. You don't want to deal with negative stuff. Everything is positive, and you just do that kind of stuff. While the shamanic practices actually make sure that you see all these aspects. And the ones that I know never say these are negative, because these are seen as energies, and then you understand how to transmute it. So this is what he's saying, that how the shamanic practices are different from more sanitized image of what is, spirituality.
You can't, in my view, in my experience, you can't sanitize shamanism.
Right. Right.
Just boom, there it is.
Yeah, because the very process will take you to the, very
exactly.
Sorry, my internet dropped, so I'm back. Yeah, sorry.
Oh yes. So it's very hard to sanitize, and I like, it's not. You encounter spirits of the world, and sometimes, certainly it's happened to me, you have deep mystical experiences, but you can have terrifying experiences as well. And, you just bear it. They do say, one elder shaman that I have done many sessions with always says, Madre Ayahuasca, Mother Ayahuasca, she's a female plant, will never give you what you cannot bear. And I trust in that. That's been my experience. Yes, it can be very hard, very frightening, but you can bear it. You can bear it. I don't know if it answers your question, but the shamanic path, if it's done right, and also it depends on the shaman. The shaman can affect deeply what happens in a session. And, his songs and his rituals are extremely powerful. And if you have a dark shaman or a sorcerer shaman, you can get into trouble, right? So, you know, choosing your shaman and where you do it is very important, and you have to do it very carefully. And since it's not professionalized and nobody's vetting anybody, it's you've got to hear it from people on the ground who've been there a long time and know the situation. It's hard. It's hard to deal with this, but it can be dealt with. I mean, I've had people coming to Lamas from the global north, and Lamas is the town where my center is, and kind of doing a inquest, you know, asking around about shamans, and they hear who's good and who's not good, and they can be guided towards the right people.
Frédérique, I have a friend here, Lazaro. Lazaro, do you want to share some of this? She's from Cyprus, and amazing experiences of the shamanic world. So, you know, Lazaro, you want to share something?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? I'm not used to this Zoom thing. I usually do it telepathically through my head. So this technology is a little bit new for me. Yeah, I've actually lived in India, but I've also tried shamanism and ayahuasca together with various other Latin American methods of shamanism. And I have found that for me, the group is also very important as well as the shaman. And this is where I've combined the two. Can you hear me?
Now, yes. Now, yes, but before you went away.
Okay.
Lazaro, can you please put the microphone to your mouth? The microphone to your mouth, please. Thank you.
Am I there? Can you hear me
Yes, now. Yes, it is good. Thank you.
I've combined both of them. I've lived in ashrams in India as well as practiced some of the shamanic methods with a shaman here in Cyprus, from Colombia, an indigenous shaman from Colombia. And I found that I have to combine both methods. And I'll tell you why. I think it's important to realize both methods are used together. It's very common in a group setting where people bring their own anger and their own frustrations and their own ideas and their own inner world with them. If you have a meditation method where you've already begun the cleansing, you actually understand the plant. I can sit and meditate and go somewhere, just as I can take the plants and go somewhere with the plant.
Lazaro, we keep losing you. We keep losing you.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, keep the
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you have to keep close to the mic. Don't move away.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. I can sit in meditation with ayahuasca and not vomit because I allow the energy to pass through me directly up rather than get lost in everybody's, in the environment, in the energies of the environment. So it's actually very important to combine the two. Otherwise, your mind goes everywhere. And this is my experience. So there is a way of controlling the darker side, and it's not necessarily controlling, but it's coming within yourself. It's about dealing with your energies, cleansing your own inner world, which then has an impact on the world around you. I can give you an example. We're in a circle, and I'm meditating with my eyes closed, and I sensed the shaman thinking of me, and his energy was not clear. For me, it was very clear that his energy was not clear because he believed he had to carry the world on his shoulders without cleansing his own inner world first. So I pulled out of the circle, and he sensed me. I was meditating outside of the circle. He sensed me. He sensed that he became detached from my energy for his own needs. he came to find me, and I knew he was there. I sensed that he was there, and I said, look, please, I don't want to be in a circle. I want to sit alone. And he insisted on bringing me back, and I felt the tug of energy wars going on there. And I said, no, I'm not coming back in the circle. I know what's happening. Cleanse yourself properly before you conduct something like this. I want to remain out of the circle. And I vomited for him. You see, so I think it's very important to know yourself first and to have certain values that you put in place before you can actually endeavor on something like this. Because you see, you become a mirror for what, everything becomes clearer. And this is my experience of combining the Eastern methods with the shamanic practices. Yeah.
Can I respond?
Yes.
Yes. So, in my experience, that is almost 25 years of
All right.
many times a year, and especially in the last 14 years, I've done it very often in a center close to my center for treating drug addiction. So the other people these are interns who stay, and then they open that session for a few outsiders like me. So I am usually in with people who are drug addicts, and after, when I come out of the trance, I am told what has happened, and I did not smell, hear, feel anything, nothing. I am gone. I'm totally gone. I meditate at the beginning before the trance takes over. Mareación, they call it, kind of being like that. But when I'm in trance, and I've heard that people have been screaming, acting out, pooping, you know, all kinds of things happen, and I don't know. This is how I am completely out. I think partly it has to do with the skill or the power or who the shaman is, and how, in this case, it's shamans in the plural. Two women, 2 or 3 men, always men and women. So that's been my experience. It's not everybody's experience. Many people know what's going on, but I don't. Even when it's very loud, very smelly, whatever, I just don't know what has happened. So it's a very different experience. I can meditate only at the very beginning, before the trance enters. And that only lasts about half an hour, and then I'm gone. I mean, it's close to a death. It feels like dying. And at the beginning, I was very afraid, very afraid. I mean, it's like you're falling off a cliff and you don't know if you're going to survive it, because you disappear totally.
Go to a spiritual death.
Yeah, it feels like a real death, like a body death, mind death, body death.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, I was very afraid, and I was meditating to overcome that fear. But now I'm used to it because, you know, I got used to it. So it's a very different experience. And I cannot emphasize strongly enough the nature and quality of the shaman or shamaness. Unfortunately, there are very few women, because the Spaniards were much harder on the women than on the men. And they well nigh exterminated the women. Not totally, you still have, but they have to overcome, colloquially, they are called witches in Spanish, brujas. Which is strange. The men are called brujos, wizards or sorcerers, if they are known to do black magic, to do harm. And the point is that shamanism is effective, both in its harm and in its healing. It can heal profoundly, psychologically, physically, emotionally, in every way. And it can kill, effectively, or make you sick or something. I've seen both of all of this. All of it.
We had a shaman from Colombia, Christian Chinoy, his name. I'm not sure.
Lazaro, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
We have had here, can you hear me now? An indigenous shaman, Christian Chinoy, his name, from Colombia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with an indigenous shaman. And we have recently, over the last year, had a death. There's been a death in his group. A girl had passed away. So it's become completely illegal. People were arrested. They had to make a dash and leave, leaving the ayahuasca behind. So we've had a difficult situation because of the ayahuasca.
Well, can I just say one thing? It's like the yogic powers. That's why, yama niyamas in India are vital. You have to take the vow of non-violence and all that before you are, when you are dealing with this kind of stuff and you do not know.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, you cannot just jump to from one not knowing into something so much higher. You have to have the discipline. So even Buddhist tantras, you have to create the base and then you build so that, you realize that those things, engaging with these negativities and power, in the end, they turn around and hurt you. But in the meantime, they can give you a lot of power, and which of course is very intoxicating and, destructive. But a lot of people fall prey to that. It's not very different. So like, you need the right guru. You cannot have, so the same thing, you need the right shaman. So
this is why I believe in meditation. I'm practicing non-violence, love, compassion, the body's ideas. Before, this is my idea. Before you try something like this, otherwise there's too many energies going around, which can be quite frightening. I think, from my experience. But I have been to different forests, and without taking any kombucha, I don't normally take these substances, even if they're part of nature anyway. But I was recently in the forest of the Philippines. I was just sitting there drawing and meditating, and the forest spirits revealed themselves to me. So I'm very clear that this is what saddens me about the destruction of nature, the selfishness of man thinking that they're the only ones this, or the physical is the only thing that's this.
No, we can't hear you, Lazaro.
Can you hear me now?
It's coming in and out. Yeah.
It's coming in and out.
Sorry. I was just talking about the rainforest. That there are spirits that do live there, and I think it's very selfish of man to think that they are the only animals in existence. This is what saddens me about the destruction of forests. I've met shamans there who are amazing, and the forests have been destroyed even there.
Do you think that most people have left?
Where? Spirits?
No, here. The group here. Oh,
yeah, we're about 20 minutes over our, Frédérique, we're about 20 minutes over our end time. So shall we say just maybe one more comment, or where can they find more information about you?
Yes, I would like that. And I don't know how.
I'm recording this too, so we can share this recording.
I would very much like to communicate, and I don't know how to do it unless I write it and very clearly and you can see it. I would like you to check our website. I would be very grateful for that. And I have changed the name recently of our website. So I'm going to write it because it's in Spanish.
I can put it in the chat for you too, okay?
Can you see it? Shall I write it in this chat?
Yes, 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 please.
Okay.
Asociación Sachamama?
Yes, Asociación Sachamama, exactly. Chat. Type.
I just put the so your center's website right there on chat.
Ah, there it is. Yes. Well, that's what whoever did it. Asociación.
I just put it there.
Okay, great. I also wrote it, so wherever it is. Thank you. Yeah, I would love for you to go, and I would love for you to visit, of course, after COVID, because COVID is very bad in Peru, and it's spiking now. So they've closed Peru. So this is my first time in Cambridge in years. Usually I'm in Peru at that time. But hopefully we will get a vaccine and we will be able again to travel. And I hope to see many of you to come to visit me there. That would be wonderful. I have to say that I call him my godson. He's another son. He's my daughter's age. He's 37. I've known him since he's 15. He's the daughter of my right arm, a woman who's been with me at the center. And he's been there with us, doing amazing things. And 4 years ago, he was against his will very much, initiated by the spirits. He tried to say no. They didn't give him that option. And after a lot of struggle and trying to give it up 2 years into the path, he committed to it. It's an amazing journey, incredible journey he has been on, and he and I are writing about it. So he now leads sessions at our center. We both have the center close to town, and we have it also in the forest. So we do retreats and workshops, combination ecology workshops, healing the internal and external landscape. So I would love for any one of you to come and visit. So if you go on the website, there'll be links that show you lots of pictures. If you go on the hostel link, Hospedaje Sangapilla, within Sangapilla, there are links to the forest retreat. So links within links.
Wonderful, thank you. So I will save this recording. You'll be able to find it also on the Truth and Reconciliation website for viewing at a later date. And I believe through Frédérique's website, you can contact her and learn more.
I want to thank all of you for coming. I am very grateful, and especially Christina for
my pleasure.
helping me. Are you Latin? Your name sounds Latin.
No, Hungarian, Yugoslavian.
Thank you so much, Christina, for helping.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Very Helen that you came.
Yeah, so good to see you and hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
All right.